So it's now reached 10 a.m. here in Japan, the opening time for our event. So we'd like to proceed with today's seminar. We'll just check. Yes, the meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. The live stream will only be the Japanese language. However, we will make this English available for people afterwards as well. So here we go. Good morning or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining our second international webinar on the update from 10 years since the Fukushima disaster. What is happening? So today we will be talking about various different radioactive materials, particularly the radioactive water and contaminated soil. We are approaching 10 years since the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster. However, this is still an ongoing disaster, and we are seeing also many new continuing issues coming to light as the time passes as well. The issue of contaminated water and contaminated soil are indeed issues which, as the time is passing, we are really seeing new developments, new parts, new sections of these issues as well. Many of you have probably seen in the news recently, but the Japanese government has said that they are going to be making a decision even this month to go ahead with releasing contaminated water into the ocean. There are very few voices who were in support of this in the various opportunities to hear opinions from different industry and the public and so on. There's been very strong opposition. However, the Japanese government seems to be going ahead with this. Today, we will be hearing from various people in Fukushima as well in order to hear their local perspectives on this as well. So part two, we'll be looking at the contaminated water issues and part two on contaminated soil, and we'll be hearing local voices in each of those as well as from FOE Japan. So very briefly to introduce the work of FOE Japan. FOE Japan is of course the Japanese branch or Japanese organization of Friends of the Earth International. We are working with around 10 staff members in our office in Tokyo on various different environmental related issues. As well as the nuclear issues, which we will be talking about today, we're also working on climate change, development, finance, and investment, looking also at the Japanese government and Japanese public funds and so on, particularly Japan's development programs overseas, and looking at what kind of environmental and also human rights violations or impacts are happening in local communities as well. We're also working on these other various issues. We have a lot of contents planned for today, so we'll keep that introduction very short. And today's session is being brought to you by FOE Japan and Peace Boat, also a Japanese organization. One of the programs which has been launched since last year is called the Fukushima Mieruka project. Literally, this means to make things visible. So the motivation really for launching this project was seeing 10 years passing since the Fukushima disaster. We're seeing that really the issues and what is still going on is being made deliberately invisible in a way. And we feel this is a very critical issue. This year, of course, the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics were planned to be holding, and really under the slogan of the so-called recovery is really what was being emphasized to the world and also in Japan as well. So the issues of the ongoing nuclear disaster were really being made less and less visible, making it seem that things were over, that everything was finished. We will add a link in the chat box, but within the project, there are various different facets and activities, but one of the main things is to enhance the information sharing from Fukushima about the ongoing situation as well. So today we'll be featuring some of this information, but also having different data, local videos in various languages and so on this web page too. So please take a look at it when you can. So that's the end of the introduction for today, and we will move into the contents of today's program. To kick things off, though, first of all, we will show a brief video of the voices of fishermen from Fukushima, interviewing them on their perspectives on the contaminated water issue. The video will be speaking in Japanese, but with English subtitles.
今、福島県の漁業者からは怒りの声が上がっています。今年2月、国の委員会が東京電力福島第一原発で発生するトリチウムなどの放射性物質を含む大量の処理汚染水を海洋放出することが現実的な選択肢とする報告書を作成したのです。2018年に開催された公聴会では、多くの人たちが海洋放出に反対し、陸上でタンクなどにより長期保管すべきと主張しました。
福島県の漁業者としてアルプス処理水の海洋放出には強く反対する、これが県漁連の意見でございます。
しかし、こうした意見は無視されてしまいました。これに漁業者たちは疑問を呈します。
公聴会はネットで見れたんで、私も全部見ましたけども、一番の多い意見、主流の意見っていうのはやっぱもうしばらくタンクに保管するっていう、とりあえずの妥協案だと私は思うんですよ。で、主流の意見を排除していくっていうことはどうなのって
福島県の小名浜港、日本有数のこの港は福島第一原発からはおよそ55キロです。出荷制限は解除されましたが、水揚げ量は未だに震災前の 15% 程度です。原発から出た処理水を海に流せば、これから後継者が減っていくと漁師の志賀さんは懸念します。
海洋放出ありきで首相も何もああいうふうにやって公言してさ言ってるんだ。ただ自分らはこれからのやつを心配してるのは後継者の問題ですよね。万が一だよ、想定外のやつの魚がさ出た場合ねえ、本当に若手なんか困るよ、漁業者は。本当に死活問題だっけよ、ねえ、売れないんだもん。今宣言、今専務が言うとおり、風評である程度のこれ払拭がなってきてるのにさ、組合だって潰れちゃう県のね、県漁連だってなんだって、そうですよ。だから福島だけじゃないと思うよ。茨城だろうが宮城だろうが、水産関係のやはりそういう風評庁の今度外国産輸出もう何もできなくなったら国だって困ってる。
福島県最北端の鶴浜漁港、原発からはおよそ50キロの距離にあります。漁師の小野春夫さんは国の姿勢に対して憤りを感じています。
今まだ8年9年しか経ってないんだから慌てっこじゃないの。だべ慌てて海した必要じゃないのよ。タンクを増設すればいいんだから、タンクネートでは山を削ってここのとこ提案にして山を買って山だって安いんだから二足三万なんだからここ増設して、本当は一番うちの知事がやらなくたらねえやつなんだけど、発信しなくたらいいんだけど、茨城県有名にね、俺は福島県は絶対ねこんなの海には絶対反対ですって表明していればよっぽど違うんだけどね。
小野さんには3人の息子がいます。3人とも漁師になり、海がこれ以上汚れることに不安を感じています。
だって息子3人もあいつすんのによ、海にも絶対に困ってんだって。今の状態で今の若いお父さんたちがお母さんたちがこの息子に先が見いいのに漁師になってくださいって俺だってやるよ、先が見えないんだからでしょ。他に上がることも簡単あったけど、やっぱり僕と成り行きついでおったらよ、ずっとついてまでいしたこれはですよ。このためにはやっぱり我々の今の現役の人が反対するにことったら誰がんだら海ままのやっぱり漁業者だべよ。
震災の時、新地町では津波で119人の命が失われました。それに加えて原発事故により生りが奪われそうになっているのです。被害は未だに深刻です。今が旬の白魚について小野さんに聞くと、
だって本当に白魚って高級魚で普通は3000から5000するわけだ。昨日の値段で600円だからでやっぱり5分の1。白魚っての今が本当の旬だから、魚ってよ 一日うまいってことが出るんだって。どんな魚でも旬ってあるのよ。一番うまいよ。野菜とあと果物と同じで、今が知らんが一番の美味しい子供ってやっぱり魚はやっぱり子供っての美味しいのよ。我々魚取っちゃって売れないでしょ。今だけ塩2回しか出ないですけど売れないのに。ほんじゃけ安いのによ。塩6回も出なかったら本当に100円とか50円ですよ。ほったことらなあ、もったいないべ。せっかく増えてる魚を今売れない魚取る必要ないべ。
今年2月、すべての魚種の出荷が可能になったものの、福島県沿岸の水揚げ量は依然として少ないといいます。
魚がなかなか売れないし、そしてやっぱり買う人も、福島の魚っていうか、固定観念がそういうやつがあるから、なんか同じ東証の上さ、宮城県だ、福島だ、茨城のね、魚があると、脇焼きの魚は買わないと福島の魚を買わないよっていうような感じのやつもちらほら耳にもするから、いわき漁協でも小野浜でも相馬の方でも曹操地区でもみんな漁業者泣いてました。はい。福島のレッドル貼られちゃうとみんな買ってくれないんだもん。
小野浜では今でも毎日水揚げがされたすべての魚種に対して放射性物質の測定を行っています。
そこにミンチ状にしてちっちゃい容器があるんですけど、そこに入れてこっちの中の機械で測るんですよ。
それは放射性物質
放射性物質、セシウム測る。
毎回やっていらっしゃる。
毎回その日水揚げされたその魚種すべてですね、今20、30になりますね。1日。
未だに検出されることも
ほとんどないです。
そうですか。
もう
ND
ですね。
しかし、測定にかかる費用すべてが保証されているわけではありません。
こういった費用はなんか補助成金とかでその測定の費用みたいな。
いや、我々で出して検査専門の職員ですけども、これは県とか市からの助成金で雇ってるんです。機械はこれは県から借りてる形なんですけど、細かいところで言ったら水代とか電気代とかそういうものは全部我々出してますね。消防員とかね。多分処理水を流したからって死ぬ人は出ないかもしれないですけども、経済的に窮地に追い込まれたら死ぬ人は増えるんですよ。
福島県の有権者に対しての世論調査においても 57% が海洋放出に反対で、風評被害の不安を感じるという回答が 89% となりました。
メディアのやつだって新聞だってみんなみんな反対だよね。村とか町でもみんな反対してるもんね。いや陸の人も反対してるんだから、現場の人はそれ以上の気持ちだからね。はい。今度本当に漁業者ばっかりじゃないんだろう、痛みはね。1000円よってんだって観光物産のやつだって何だってもらって加工して売ることも何もみんな大変なんじゃないかなと思うよ。
福島第一原発がある地元の声はどのようなものでしょうか。大熊町の町議会議員の小畑真澄さんは汚染水の海洋放出反対を訴えます。
でやはり汚染水を流さないでと、町民の方で自分のところを使ってもいいよとか、自分の土地をそこに置いとけばいいのにとか、そういう意見が非常に今多いです。昔から取ってきたのは魚です。その魚を本当に安心して食べれるような状況じゃなくなってしまったら、この子どもたちの将来はどうなるのと。だから自分の土地を使ってもいいよという人まで今話をしています。出ています。でも国は一切私たちの意見には耳を傾きません。
そもそも国や東電はトリチウムは水と同じ性質で濃縮もしないし、希釈して海洋放出しても安全だとしています。しかしトリチウムによる人体への影響については不明なことが多く、専門家によって意見は分かれます。海外では生物濃縮や健康影響を示す論文も発表されているといいます。
生体濃縮が起こりうるということです。
海水濃度の2倍強の濃縮が魚の中で起こっているというふうな報告がされていました。したがって、生体濃縮が起こって、その頂点にいるのは人間ですので、ですから周りの遺伝子を傷つけるという恐れもありますし、将来的にがんになる恐れ、がん細胞に発展していく恐れがあるいは遺伝的な影響を及ぼしていく恐れがあるというようなことが心配されます。それでトリチウムを多く放出するカナダ型の原発と重水炉なんですが、そこでは下流域に小児白血病とかダウン症とかですね、新生児死亡などの増加というのが報告されていて、これは政府の報告書の中にも、そういう報告がされていて、これは川への放出なんですけど、下流域でそういうことが行われる、そういう症状が多く見られるということが言われています。
2018年8月、トリチウムだけではなくストロンチウム90などの放射性物質も残留することがメディアの報道で明らかになりました。その後の東電の発表によると、タンクの水の約7割が基準を超えて放射性物質が残留しています。今年4月、福島県漁連は政府に対し意見書を提出しました。
福島県の漁業者として、トリチウム処理水の海洋放出には反対するという立場を主張していきたいと思います。
海洋放出の問題は福島県だけでなく、周辺の県や海外からも反対の声が上がっています。
だからトリチウムだって海じゃ流れだったらずっと拡散して逆に今度日本が攻めらっぺよ。だべよ、直入者ばっかり福島県の問題でねえんだって。全世界の問題なんだから、そんなことはなんでこういうことを考えねえんだ。
はい、ありがとうございました。こちらの動画はです
Thank
ね、
you very much. So this video is available on YouTube in not only Japanese and English, but also a variety of other languages as well. So please feel free to check out the FOE homepage for this as well. So we'll pass to our first speaker for today, which is Kanna Mitsuta of FOE Japan, on an update on the situation of the contaminated water. So good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everybody. So today I will be giving you a brief update about the situation of the contaminated water, the radioactive materials on the Fukushima Dai-ichi nuclear power plant site. So as has already been mentioned by Ayumi today, and just to let you know, an English version of this PowerPoint has just been added in the comments if you'd like to take a look at it there. So there is, of course, recent reporting in the past couple of days that the Japanese government is going to make its decision within this month about what to do about releasing radioactive contaminated water from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The day before this was reported, so on October 15, the National Association of All Fisheries Associations submitted a formal request, a formal opinion to the Japanese government, calling on them not to release this into the ocean. So this is what we see in the photograph here. This is a very significant step. So the same day as this, we can see also these various different submissions were made to the government, to the ministers, and so on, calling on the Japanese government not to release this. And then it was just this very day after which showed that there was the Japanese government about to make its decision. So this is something that we, of course, very much question. This is a photograph from news just 2 days ago on JNN, which is an organization which conducted its various investigation and so on onto this situation as well. From April until July this year, the ministry was calling for the public to submit their opinions in regards to the release of contaminated water. And I'm sure that many people who are listening to this symposium today also submitted. There were 4,011 submissions to this, and 10% of these have been made public. So only 10%, is saying that they're ready. But if we conduct, JNN conducted an analysis of this, and it showed that there was a clear opposition. That's 74% of the submissions were against the release of the radioactive materials, and only 32 in support. So this really questions, well, if they're going to this process of having the public comments and so on, and there is such an overwhelming opposition, and yet still going ahead with this plan, is something that we feel very angry about. So first of all, well, what is the Alps contaminated water, the Alps treated water in the first place? So this diagram, hopefully you have all been able to access the PDF in the chat box, which has the English version as well. But we can see the water which has been taken up from within the tanks is being stored in tanks after treatment. There are three different stages to the so-called treating or cleaning of this. And within this, we can see that the water which has been used this is what the government is calling treated water. However, we refer to it still as contaminated water. This is what we can see being held in the tank on the left of the diagram. However, the Alps treated contaminated water, there is now over 1.2 million meters cubed of this. And there is also the fact that it still contains high levels of tritium, which cannot be removed from this. There are 860 trillion becquerels of tritium still in this. Tritium, well, as long as a nuclear power plant, any nuclear power plant is in operations, this is something which will be released. In the year 2010, so the year before the disaster, until then, the Daiichi nuclear power plant was releasing 2.2 trillion becquerels of tritium into the ocean every year. So this was already the situation then. Also, for example, from reprocessing facilities, as we've seen in other countries and so on as well, there are also cases of tritium being released into the water. However, the situation of this Alps treated contaminated water, it contains not only tritium, but also that even though it's gone through this Alps or this system, it's shown that some overseas reprocessing plants also, that the Alps treated water still contains cesium-137, 134, strontium, and iodine, and so on as well. So this is showing here, perhaps, first of all, TEPCO was saying that it would be up to 20,000 times. However, this number was deleted from some of the METI, the ministry information later on as well. So we can see that it's a little bit difficult to see really the actual figures of this, because there is not clear information yet, but we're using around the 20,000 times figure, which we can see the max 19,909 on the right of this as well. So there are different sort of experiments or testing going on at the moment, having a secondary treatment process as well, and seeing the government is saying that they are, well, reaching the limits, the standards that have been set. However, of course, that's still not bringing it down to zero as well. So this is still an issue of concern. I'll skip over some of these slides because they are rather detailed. But TEPCO released its proposal for this, saying that it will not be releasing all of the amount at the time, but over the 30 to 34-year period, which is required for decommissioning. So they're also saying that, for example, the different water when it's being released into the ocean, it will be diluted with seawater, and then referring to what the government is saying is operation standards of 1,500 becquerels per liter for groundwater bypass and for a subdrain. This is somewhat of a technical issue, but the 1,500 becquerels per liter that we have listed here, or the tritium standards, for those who see that as 60,000 as the standard, so they say, well, it is fairly low, it is fairly diluted. It might have that kind of impression. However, the restrictions, the standards which are in place for nuclear power plants, this is looking at when there are the various different kinds of radioactive materials and so on. So it's actually showing the overall different kinds, the combination of the different kinds of radioactive materials and so on. So if we see just the groundwater bypass and so on, which is being, well, this is, we can say the 60,000 becquerels per liter just for tritium, it's actually combining all different kinds of materials. So it's somewhat misleading perhaps in a way to see that it's making it seem like it's quite low, but in reality it's actually still quite a difficult situation there. One of the important points which we actually saw on this video as well is that the local fishing communities are extremely vocal in their opposition to these plans. Of course, they are relying completely on the local fishing for their livelihoods, for their living and so on. So the various different local associations and also national associations have been repeatedly voicing their opposition. And there are various reasons, of course, that they are in opposition to this. The greatest reason, of course, being their reliance on the ocean for their livelihoods. But there is various background over the years since immediately after the disaster in 2011, when there have been various different releases of contaminated water into the ocean, either deliberately or non-deliberately as well. So for example, in April 2011, so just a month after the disaster, as an emergency measure, TEPCO released 10,000 tons of contaminated water without any consultation at all with the local fishermen beforehand as well. And there was a strong opposition to this. Following this as well, there was also various different suspicions that various contaminated water was leaking into the ocean as well. It was only in 2013, in July, that TEPCO acknowledged the fact that there had been leaks of contaminated water of very high levels into the ocean as well. This day was actually the day of, sorry, the 21st was the day of the election that month. And then TEPCO acknowledged this the day after on the 22nd. So that's also a very important point of the timing. There was also the mention of how to reduce the groundwater, which is going into the main plant building and so on. There was a huge amount at the time immediately after the disaster. So there are various different plans in place as to how to reduce this, whether it was to, carry or transfer that water somewhere else and so on. TEPCO had been conducting various different methods for this. They did place a lot of pressure on the local fishing associations in order to ask them to give permission to release this into the ocean. And there was an instant actually in 2014 where, not seeing that they had any other options, the fishing associations did, while they were not in strong support of this, they felt that they had to allow one of these proposals to go along. So there is this long background, right, since immediately after the disaster. And at that time, however, TEPCO made a promise, and this is showing the actual promise in writing, that the government would not release any more contaminated water without the prior consultation and support of the fishing associations. But we feel that this is really going against this promise now. This graph is showing the public opinion of people in Fukushima and also showing some photographs now of young people leaving a protest against the release of contamination, also local citizens organizations in Fukushima, as we see in the photograph here. So despite the fact that there is such a strong opposition to this, it seems that they are still planning to go ahead of this. However, is there really no other way to do this? There is an organization called the Citizens Commission for Nuclear Energy, which includes engineers and researchers with great expertise and also many different citizens and community groups as well. And this group has put forward its own proposal about how to have stable long-term land storage using tanks or also land disposal by mortar. One of the reasons the government is saying that they have to go around for this is that there is not sufficient land in order to increase the number of tanks for storage and so on. This map here is showing the Fukushima Dai-ichi plant, and this orange part at the front is showing an area which could potentially be used for this. And there are also various interim storage sites around the nuclear power plant site. There are also proposals, for example, of expanding the area of the site as well so that there can be more storage on site. What the ministry is saying is that it's difficult because of various restrictions or the local landowners are not in support of expanding the site. But when we say, well, have you actually asked the landowners? It doesn't seem that they have. There hasn't been a direct conversation there at all. We also will have a brief slide here about the health risks of tritium. Due to time limits today, we won't get into a great amount of detail on this, but the Japanese government is emphasizing the fact that tritium already exists in nature. It's already being released in large quantities from plants both in Japan and internationally, that it's being diluted and so on. They're not going as far as to say that it's completely safe. However, they are saying that it is very much decreased. However, at the same time, the are various different points, for example, about tritium remaining for a long time in the body, bioaccumulation, and the effects and so on as well, which are of concern. Another very significant issue is about whether the voice of the people has actually been listened to by the government. In August of 2018, the subcommittee on the Alps treatment held several different opportunities to have hearings from people, both in Fukushima and in Tokyo. And then this year, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry had some hearing opportunities. However, this was just for people who they were inviting themselves, shall we say. There have been 7 different such sessions, but if you look at the list here, there's a very heavy emphasis on industry related, the chambers of commerce and industry, the forestry industry associations, various different companies, and so on. And also the local municipalities as well, of course. But if we look, of course, this is quite representative of some of the negative parts of the Japanese society in general. But most of the people representing these are, men who are in their 50s or above, shall we say. So the English slide might be a little bit out of date, but there's actually been 46 people who have been invited at these hearings to give their positions, 45 of whom were men, and there were no young people represented either. But within this, we can see that also not only the fisheries people have been in opposition, but also those involved in forestry, agriculture, and so on. But it seems that these oppositionary positions are being completely ignored. So there are various issues, first of all, about how these hearings were held in the first place, and second of all, about whether the opinions which are being shared there are actually being listened to. There has also been various different opposition from internationally. This is a photograph from Taiwan, where 23 environmental NGOs submitted statements in regards or in opposition to this. So it seems that this decision will be made this month. Then they are planning to have 2 years to have what's called, a lot of budget being put to prevent any so-called harmful rumors. This has been one of the key words heard in Japan or in Fukushima since the disaster. But how to have 2 years to prepare for this and then to actually start the releases 2 years later. FOE Japan is conducting an international signatory campaign against this, which we'd invite you all to sign. We'll share the link afterwards as well. And we're also calling on the government to hear more broadly from different citizens of different positions as well. And we plan to submit this to the government by October 20, on October 20 this month. Thank you very much, Mitsuda-san. Now we'll move to hear some voices from locally in Fukushima. Just to share, we had some comments about the presentation files. So the English version was shared in a PDF in the Zoom chat. We'll also make it available on the homepage afterwards as well. The Japanese, we haven't added the link in the chat today, but we'll be posting it on the homepage soon as well for people to refer to as well. So first of all, we have Mr. Sato Kazuyoshi from Iwaki who's joining the call, and we'll be hearing a comment from him. So I'll just try to share my screen. If you can just make me a co-host as well, please.
はい。これで大丈夫ですかね。
So hopefully you can see these slides now. We apologize that these are only available in Japanese. My name is Sato. I am from Iwaki City in Fukushima, and I'm one of the joint representatives of the local communities group against the ocean release. Mitsuda-san has just introduced the overall system, so there may be some points which double up in my presentation, but I'll just share a little bit about the local situation here and our efforts as well.
ご案内の通り、
So as was
福島原発
mentioned,
事故から
currently,
9年
well,
7ヶ
since
月経ってお
it's
ります
9
けれ
years,
ども、
7 months since the
原子力緊
Fukushima
急事態
nuclear
宣
power
言
plant
はいまだ
disaster.
に解除されていない。
However, there is
政府が
still the emergency
2011年の3
situation
月
being
11
declared
日に出した
since,
緊急事態宣言が続いているということなん
day
ですね。
in March
で、
2011. That's
こ
still
の
continuing. So we are still
画
in
面
an
にあります
emergency
ように、
situation.
タ
As
ン
you
ク
can
貯
see in the
蔵潜
photograph here,
水は、
the
まあ、今
storage of
現状
contaminated water in
123
the
万トン
tanks
近くになってい
is
る
now close
と
to
いうことです。で
1.2
すから、
million
この汚染
tons.
水の問題っていうの
So
は、
the contaminated water
海洋
issue,
放
of
出
course,
ということになればですね、
is, well, if we're looking at this
ま
being
あ、計
potentially
画では
released into
2
the
年
ocean,
後に
well, the plan is that they
開
will
始するという
start
こと
doing
で、
that in 2
それから
years, it
30年
seems.
から40
And
年
this is something to continue for
放出し
30 to
続けるということ
40
になりますから、
years,
果た
continuous
してそれ
ongoing
で終わ
release
るの
since
かと
then.
いうこ
But
とに
will
も
that
なり
even
ますね。
be the
で、そ
end
れ
of
とあ
it
ともう
is
一つ
something that we
私たちが問
question.
題にしているのは、
Another
こ
thing that
の
we
タンク
see
貯
as an
蔵汚染
issue
水の他
is
にですね、
that, well, as well
建
as
屋
these
内に
tanks and this water as well, there is
残
also
留水っていうのがあって、
various different
こ
remnant
れ
water in
に
the
トリ
reactor
チウムだけ
building
でも
itself, which
1209兆ベクレルの残留
contains,
水が
you know,
あると
trillions of
いうことで
becquerels
すから、
of
1F 全体
tritium
でトリ
there
チウ
as
ム
well. So if we look at
水
the
という
tritium
こと
levels
だ
of the
けを考
tritium
えて
water
も、
levels in the whole Fukushima
2069兆ベクレ
plant,
ルを
you
放
know,
出され
it's
かねないという可能性を、この
an even
タ
more
ン
and
ク貯
even
蔵汚
higher
染水
amount
の
than
放
just the
出が始まる
1.2
と、
million
残
tons
留
in
水
these
の
tanks as well. So
建
while
屋
that
残
may
留
be the
水の
focus
放
of the
出ま
discussion
で
or the proposal
継
by the
続し
government,
て、
there is also the
3、40
risk
年か
that
ら
they
さ
will
らに100年
continue
というようなこ
even
とに
more
も
than
なりかね
30 to
ない状
40
況
years, you
が
know, even 100 years
想
from
定
now
さ
to
れる
continue to
というこ
release
と
this
が危
contaminated
険性
water
の
into the
一
ocean.
つ
So
とし
this is
て
something which we
付け加
see
えてお
as
きた
a
いという
very
ふうに思い
serious
ます。
danger.
で、この概念的なこのことが
And
先ほども
so
お示しが
Mitsuda-san
出ている
has
と
already
思います。
included some of these maps and so on, so I won't
こ
go
の
into detail about
これ
the
は
structures.
先ほども
But
お
as we can
話あ
see
りま
here,
し
this
た
orange
タ
section,
ン
so
ク
this
類
is the
そ
different
して
tanks
アルプ
and
ス
so on. And
の
then this
各
green
鉱
is
物がこの
the
辺にある
Alps water.
と。で、地下水の
Thank you for the comment.
流入
The
を防ぐため
interpreter
の
has
地
just
下水バイ
brought
パ
the
スで
microphone
あ
a
っ
little
た
bit
り、
closer. In the
遮
interpreting
水壁
button, you
す
can
だれ状
also
になっ
mute
て、
the original
現実
language,
的
so
に
that might help make the Japanese
140
speaker
トン、
softer as well.
150トン1日流
So
入してい
we
ると
can
い
see
う
here as
遮
well,
水
this
壁ってい
blue
うのがある
area
という
is
状
the
況です。
contaminated
で、先ほど
groundwater
も
area
お話あった
here.
ように陸上保管は可能だっていう
So
こと
we
は、こ
believe
ち
that
ら
it is
の
possible to
これ
have
は
more
この
on
赤い点
ground
線は、
storage as well. This
町の
red
境
dotted
界線
line
ですけど、
here,
こ
it's
ち
actually
ら
the
側
border
の
between two different
タンク貯蔵
municipal
群がある
districts as
方は
well.
大
So
熊
this
町。
area where the
で、こ
tanks are
ちら
being
側
stored
の
is in Okuma town.
これから
And
ドス
this
テバと
northern
書いてあ
part,
るところ
which
と
is
か、
where there will
デブ
be
リの保
potential
管
for
庫を
more,
作
well,
る
at
って
the
いうと
moment,
ころ
they
は
are
双葉
planning to
町
build
な
a
んです。
place to
で、こ
hold
の
debris
デブリ
and
の
so
保
on.
管庫ってい
This
うの
is
は、
in the
今、
municipality
デ
of
ブリがいつ
Futaba.
取り出せるかわから
So
ない
there are
状
actually
態
two
にも
different
かかわら
municipalities,
ず、
which is
そ
one
の
of the
敷地を
reasons why there is an
確
issue
保す
of
る。
how much
あ
to
る
be
いは、
storing there and so
こち
on.
らのドス
In
テバという
this
ものについて
area
も
here, which
確
at
保
the
するということを
moment
言ってるんです
it's
ね。
planned
ですから、
for storing
い
the
つ取り出せるかもわから
water.
ない、あるいは取り出すの
Well,
か本
it's
当
it's
に
not
わから
clear
ない、
yet what kind of
このデ
storage
ブリ
will
の
be
保管
conducted
庫です
on
と
this
か、
part
ある
of
い
the
はドステ
area
バ、
as well,
こち
but
らの
there
方を利
is
用すれば
also
ですね、
potential for using
陸上保
this
管っていうのは現実的
area
には
there
可能なんで
for
すね。そう
more
いうことを
storage of the contaminated
きち
water
ん
for
と
adding more tanks and so
最
on
終的
as
に
well.
追求しないでですね、さまざまな理由をつけて、政府
And
東
so
電
there are
側
various
は
different,
海洋
issues
放
or
出に
excuses that the
の決定をで
TEPCO
す
and
ね、
the
強行
government
しよう
is
としている
making
っていう
in
のが
order
現
to
状
go
であ
ahead
りま
with the
す。
release
で、
into
先ほ
the
ども
ocean.
三田さんから原
As
子力市民委
Mitsuta-san
員
has
会
just
で提案
mentioned
され
as
ている大
well,
型タン
the
クでの長期
Citizens
保管
Nuclear
ですとか、
Commission has
あるい
also
は
made different
モルタルを溶
concrete
かして半
proposals
地下で、
about using the
保管
mortar
す
like
る
we
案です
see
と
in
か、
this photograph
こういう
here,
案に
or
ついて
also
も
expanding
モ
the
ルタル
number
硬
of
化すれ
long-term
ば
storage tanks
体
and so
積
on.
が
So
増え
these are
る
some
で
of
すと
those
か、
photographs
あ
of
るい
those
は
potential
大型化しても
alternatives
同じだ
as
とか、
well.
そういう理由で、政府と東
The
電側は
government and
こ
TEPCO
れ
at
ら
the
の
moment are saying, well, that
方
that
法に
still
ついて
wouldn't,
否定をして
fix
いると
the
いう現
situation.
状
So
もあ
they
り
are
ます。
denying
こ
that
れは
this
原子
will
力市民委
be
員会
an
の
alternative.
話
This is
とし
photographs of
て、
some of the reports
公表されて
from
いる
the
アメリ
different
カのサバンナリバー
alternatives
の
which have
核施
been
設で
proposed,
は
including, for
プ
example,
ルトニウムやト
examples
リチウムを
from
生
the
産した
Savannah
後に
River
こ
site
の
in the
サバンナリバー
US,
サバンナリ
and
バー
looking at
の
some
海
of
域固化
the
施設ということで
liquid waste
モルタル
planning
固化し
there
て
as
半地下
well.
上に、タンク貯蔵するとコンクリートの擁
And
壁
we
に
can
モル
see
タルを
here
溶かして
also,
流
this is
し込む
also
と
the
いうことが
graph
現
as
実的に行わ
well.
れているという事例であります。
We apologize about the
で、
issue with the original
先ほどもありま
Japanese.
したよ
I'll
うに
try and speak a
2018
little bit
年
louder
の
with the
8月
English
以来ずっ
interpretation and
と
hope that that can
福
help for
島
now, and then
県
we'll
民、
look into the situation
漁
a
民、
little bit more in the break between the
挙
next
げてです
speaker.
ね、この高
So
橋
this is
除施
photographs
設
of
の
some of the
い
different
わゆるアルプ
citizens'
ス処理水
hearings
と言
and
われ
so
てい
on
る
to
汚染
share
水に
their
ついて
opinion.
の
And this is
反
showing
対
that
活動を
the
ずっと公聴会で
impacts
も
of
反対を
the
してきた。
releases
あ
not
るいは先ほ
only
ど
for the local fishing
ビデオに出
communities,
まし
but
た新
also
地漁協の小野
broader
さんな
as
ど
well.
も
This is also some of the same Mr. Ono who
家
was
族挙げ
featured
てで
in
すね、
the video that we
漁
just
業の継承
showed
とい
as
うこ
well,
とも含めて
and really showing how
反対
he's
をしてきた
concerned
わけでご
also
ざいます。
about how to
で、先ほどもありましたように、
continue their
国
future for
側
now
が
as well.
何としても
The national
強行するた
government,
めにですね、
however, is doing all of it,
強行する
making
ため
all
だけ
efforts
にやっ
to
てい
push
るように
forward
も
with
考
this
えられ
plan
て、
as
その
well,
ご意
it
見を
seems.
伺う場という
You
こ
know,
と
so
で、
these public hearings, for example, that were
まあ、
mentioned,
いわき市の市長ですと
it's
か、あるい
really
は
just
JA 福
inviting
島中
some
央会
of
の会長で
the,
すとか
you know, the
を
heads of different
発言
industry
しています。
organizations who
まあ、
are,
これらはすべ
shall
て、
we say, in
福
strong
島県
support
内では
of the
県
government.
漁連、
But
県
there is
森林
also
組
in
合連合
Fukushima,
会、そ
for
れから
example, the
農協で
fishing
すね、JA 中央
corporations, the
会、そしてから
cooperatives
福
for
島県内
agriculture, for
の一
farmers,
次
and also
産
for
業の
forestry. So all of the primary
団
industry
体、生産者の団体というのは
organizations
すべ
and
て
producers
海洋放出
organizations
に
in
反対をしている
Fukushima
ということであります。
are
でもちろん、
explicitly voicing their opposition to releasing water, decontaminated water, and calling for all alternatives to be fully explored before any decision is made. These photographs were also shown before, so this was a protest held by local citizens groups in Fukushima in July this year. In September, we held for the first time a direct exchange of opinions, shall we say, or discussion with the METI officials in Fukushima as well. So it seems that and we've called on them to have many more within Fukushima to hear from the voices of the local community, and also call on them to either further reduce the water or to also, until they have the further technology to be able to completely get rid of the radioactive materials in the water, to not release it. Of Fukushima, there are 59 different local municipalities, as is shown on this, and 70% of them have submitted formal opposition. The three which are in purple, which are the ones around the nuclear power plant, are the ones which are in proposal, actually, but all of the others are showing, the pink and the green ones are all also showing the ones that have submitted official requests to the national government. And this is the list of the different names of the cities, the municipalities, and the contents of what they submitted as well. As has been mentioned, these different public hearings which have been held, there were 33 who were in opposition or extremely cautious about the plan. There were 3 who were undecided, shall we say, and 7 in support. Just checking that it's the opposite way around. Sorry, in the public hearings which are held by the government, there are 33 in support and only 7 in opposition. So they are very deliberately seeking out who they are hearing from there as well. So this is a photograph of the meeting between the National Fisheries Association and the Ministries of Economy, Environment, Agriculture, and so on as well. And also the Chief Cabinet Secretary. So over 2 full days having very, so this was on the 16th and 17th, sorry, so just very recently, having this very formal submission of opinions of being completely against the release of contaminated water into the ocean. But this has been completely ignored, completely neglected and going forward. And if the government will really go ahead with this plan, despite the fact that there are such strong voices against something which we really see the government just pushing this through. And so it seems that this decision from the government could be made, anytime just later this week, according to the media. But if this is decided and they decide to go ahead with releasing the water, then this will also lead to further secondary negative impacts on the Fukushima people. So this is really a second violation of their rights and their situation by the Japanese government following disaster as well. We strongly believe that there should not be any more impact like this, any more victimization of the people of Fukushima by the government. They talk about harmful rumors, but there are so many people whose livelihoods are directly threatened by this plan as well. People who are relying on primary industries, on fishing and so on, and also even tourism and so on as well. There will be this serious impacts as well. This is, very clear. And this is not just talking about harmful rumors, but this is serious, direct negative impact which we must prevent. Even if it's decided, there will be 2 years going through the various different regulatory commission checks and processes and so on. But if the release of the water for 30 years does start in 2 years from now, this is something which we need to look at all different kinds of measures that we can take in order to stop this release from happening. So even if they do decide this week to go ahead with the plan, we will continue our work to prevent this from happening in the coming years as well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It sounds like we had a couple of issues with the interpreting and the voices there. Sorry about that. We're just checking on some of the technical sides as well, and we hope that we'll be able to hear clearly. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your feedback and the issues in the chat. It's very helpful for us to figure out how to deal with the situation. How is it at the moment? Are you able to hear the interpretation now when the MC is speaking? If anyone could share some feedback. Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. We apologize for the volume issues in the previous speaker, but we'll hope to keep track of that and make sure that it will work well in the next as well. So next we will be hearing from Saki Okawara? Great. Thank you very much for your feedback, everybody. So, hello, everybody. My name is Saki Okawara. I live in Miharu town in central inland Fukushima. So I am also active in local citizens group against the release of water. We had the overall perspective now shared by Mr. Sato, so I'll share a little bit more of some of our perspectives about the ministry's offices here in Fukushima and what the situation is. As has been mentioned by the previous speakers as well, the Alps treated water situation now, it's been going on, and it was reported in 2018 by Kyoto News that actually 70% of the water had levels which were or it had 62 different radionuclides remaining in excess of the standard of what should be discharged. So it's been 2 years since that was released, but the situation has not changed at all since then. The number of the different nuclides and so on was not announced for quite some time, but then one more, carbon-14, was just added to the list this year. So now we have a list of 63 now as well. However, after that, the subcommittee of the Agency of Natural Resources and Energy issued a summary of their plan just in February of this year. And I'd like to share some of the local reporting in Fukushima about this as well. So this is a news article from the Fukushima Minyu, which is one of the local newspapers. There are two main local newspapers in Fukushima, and so this is one of those. And the heading says, pre-treated water, and then it says the container, or inside the container, is 770,000 becquerels of tritium. So that's the central vertical comment there as well. And then the second one is saying very low levels of radiation. The needle doesn't even shake. So what it is reporting in this is that when measures were taken of this material, the needle wasn't wavering at all. It didn't smell at all. There was no smell even when you went close up, and it was very weak radiation. Therefore, it was very safe. However, these measures were being done with a borrowed TEPCO recorder, we say. Another different TV station showed a beaker being measured with actually a stick-shaped scintillation surveyor. But actually, tritium emits beta radiation, so it cannot actually be measured by a scintillation surveyor, which measures gamma radiation. However, the reporters who were doing this, they didn't know much about the different kinds of measurements and so on. So they were very easily, we could say, fooled by TEPCO into believing this as well, which means that, of course, the local people of Fukushima who follow the news, this is their main newspaper and so on, they're also fooled into believing this message by TEPCO that it is completely safe. There is a local office of the Ministry of Economy and Energy in the town of Tomioka near the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And one of the directors there has been going around holding different explanation or information sessions about the Alps treated water for local leaders, local municipal councillors, and so on as well. And it was he who was working with TEPCO to provide this very deceptive information about the treated water to the press. And in regards to this as well, though, this really shows that we're very concerned that the public will not have access to really accurate information about the situation if they're just relying on this. Therefore, we decided to organize the direct exchange of opinions and so on, which Mr. Sato shared in his photograph as well. So there have been various different, situations where the government is saying they're holding hearings to have public opinions, but they're usually just people who have been selected by the government, so those who are quite in support. So we called from our side for us to be able to organize a citizens exchange with the ministry to share our views about this situation. And particularly, how this kind of false information or misleading information is being shared as well is something that we've been very strongly vocal about. So Director Kino is the name of the man. He knew himself, actually, when we checked then, that tritium cannot be measured with a scintillation survey meter. And when we pursued the matter more with him, he claimed, we believe falsely, that they were just using this to show that there were no radionuclides in the treated water that emitted gamma rays. However, the way that's being reported is completely different. In the different materials and so on, which are being distributed to the local municipal leaders in these information sessions and so on as well. Perhaps we'll have one of those shown on the screen now. So this is just the cover. So this was from something in September this year, materials made by the METI, the ministry. It's about 30 pages in this document, which we requested and also made sure that we received a copy of as well. And so this is about dealing with the contaminated water. And within this, only one of the 30 pages is actually describing the presence of radionuclides other than tritium in the treated water. There's no description at all of the types of radionuclides. And on this graph, it's showing the properties of the treated water. And we can see here on the bottom, there is a number which has been circled. This number says from 100 times. In previous materials, it was actually saying up to 20,000 times the standard concentration of radionuclides over this standard. So before they were saying it's up to 20,000. However, now they've changed the way that they're describing this, and they're just saying from 100 times, but not giving any kind of the more higher numbers there as well. So this, of course, means that this information, because the local public is, of course, receiving their information from the media, from their local leaders and so on as well. So we believe that if TEPCO and METI are not providing this correct information to the local people, this is information only convenient to them, shall we say, then it's unacceptable to decide on this kind of policy just based on these kind of points. Of course, the local public provides, or we see that they're kind of manipulating the information via the media, and this is what is reaching the local population as well. In the different hearing sessions being organized by METI, most of those are just ones. Well, we are calling and saying that the information needs to be provided both correctly and in a format which is easy to understand to the public, to the everyday people. And when we say correct information, we're not just talking about information that is, in the interests of TEPCO and the government, who are indeed the perpetrators of the disaster until now as well. We're calling on them not to hide this kind of information, not to kind of cover it up in this way, and to use these kind of methods to make a decision on the disposal of the contaminated water. The contaminated water issue at the moment is, of course, an issue not only for Fukushima, but for people, all of Japan and even internationally as well. So, of course, we believe that the government should have the public hearings to hear fully from the community and people in Fukushima, but we also believe that it's very important for them to be hearing more broadly from citizens both throughout all of Japan and also internationally as well, as this is, of course, a very large issue. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ogawara-san. And our last local comment from this first part, we were planning to hear from Ms. Chiyo Oda. However, unfortunately, she hasn't been feeling so well today. So we'll be reading a message on her behalf. She is also one from Iwaki City and a representative of a local community organization. And Ms. Yano of FOE will read this out. Since the Fukushima nuclear power disaster, I've been feeling very strange about the way the word recovery has been used. When we look at the situation immediately after the disaster, the fact that they stopped using SPEEDY, which was the system to measure the flow of the radiation, monitoring posts were being reduced, and even now they're talking about reusing the contaminated soil. in the news recently as well, we see that they are even having experiments about growing vegetables in the contaminated soil and so on. This kind of news is increasing day by day. At the time that the nuclear power plant happened, I was living in Fukushima, which was, beautiful, rich, a great color society. But in a moment, this color was turned to black and white. Every day when I woke up after the disaster and realized what was happening, I just thought, well, the place that we're living now, maybe now we're even facing radiation right now. Can I even be, hanging out my clothes outside? Can we still eat the delicious local fish and vegetables? No, we can't. Can we even be breathing here? Feeling about this, these kind of concerns, these kind of worries, we didn't even know when it would continue, if it would be from now. Also, Fukushima, we will be treated differently than any of the other places. We have to live in a completely different world. That was the moment every day when I woke up, what I felt first thing in the day. And now the government is trying to falsely paint colors on top of this, saying, look, you live in the same places you did before. It's the same world. There's nothing to worry about. If they just move the tanks full of water away from people's sight, then do they really think that people believe that they can go back to the way we were living before, that the recovery of our hometowns will really be happening? But of course, without compensation and without jobs, without work, there are many people who can't go back to this. But then we think about all of the people who have been working on the decontamination efforts these 9.5 years, these people who have been monitoring schools, kindergartens, parks, the radiation levels, measuring the soil and the water and the foods, trying to somehow make a society, make a community, make a place where we can live in safety again. But then we see these things happening. Most people, all we want is for such kind of suffering to never happen again, for such kind of damage to not happen again. Especially the fishermen, the farmers, the people in the primary industry, the people running shops who sell those goods, the people who are working in tourism. Of course, they are the ones raising their voices mostly about how we can continue our future as well. In the hearing, which was organized recently with METI and the local government, we called for more accurate information and to hear more voices of the local community and to make sure that this contamination won't be put in the ocean. Of more than 4,000 public comments which are submitted to the government, and also 230,000 people have signed the position against the contaminated water. But will the government even listen to us? There are also people who, to those of us who are raising our voice in against this, there are also people who try to paint us as people causing problems or who are trying to cause harmful rumors. Prime Minister Abe, who made the statement that everything was under control, has now resigned. But what will change? Will recovery just in the opposite direction go further, go even faster? Even if it's under a standard that the government has made, we don't want contaminated water to be released into the ocean. The more the impacts of the nuclear disaster continue from now, that is really what this means. It just means even more that it is ongoing, even more that the radioactive contamination will continue for decades even more, and that there will be no stop to their impacts as well. We really hope, in order to work to the real decommissioning and to a real recovery of Fukushima, that we can make sure that we fully recognize what has happened in all of these different issues. It's a fact that the disaster did happen. We don't want these facts to be hidden. We see, along with the weather report in Fukushima, we also see the levels of radiation being shown there as well. This is the situation we live on. We hope that the media will also share things more accurately so that citizens don't have to seek out their own independent information, but they can really have trust in the media and have trust in what the government is saying. If that would happen, if that would change, then people could finally start to look in the same direction together towards a real form of recovery. Thank you very much. So the message we just heard now was from Ms. Chiyo Oda in Iwaki City. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us directly, so FOE has read it over on her behalf. So we'll be moving into Q&A now. People are welcome to use their cameras and microphones themselves to ask questions. However, just because we only have the simultaneous interpretation going in one direction today, I'm sorry. If you have any questions in English, we'd like to ask you to raise them in the chat box. Thank you for your understanding for that. If you can write the questions in English in the chat, we'll be sure to address them within the session as well. Thank you for your understanding on that method.
間違えました。あ、そうですか。失礼しました。では、山内さん。
So if anyone has any questions or comments for the speakers, feel free to share them in the chat. So the question now, also seeing on the news, I was very shocked about this, decision about the government, going forward when we see that there's so much opposition, so many voices of people calling against this. Have they actually considered these? Are these questions actually being listened to at all? It's really just a surface level listening to the voices, which we can't call democratic at all. It's like they already have the conclusion of what they're going to do. And this is just the way of politics in Japan at the moment, of going forward without actually having any kind of democratic process there. So the fact that there are thousands of comments all submitted, there needs to be some kind of a process for these to actually be listened to. And perhaps this is something that we can be doing, that we can be calling for now as well. The government also should be listening to expert opinions on, for example, on the environment, on the ecosystem, on fish, and so on as well. And this is also something which I really question about whether that's happening too. So this, for example, looking at the also issue of other radionuclides other than tritium, for example, or even the issue of tritium itself, even if they say it has low levels of radiation, there is so much that we don't know about it, so many risks that are still potentially there as well. And so this should not be, released in this way as well. And this is also an issue not only for Fukushima, but for the whole Pacific Ocean. The decontamination, of course, for the Fukushima Dai-ichi nuclear power plant, well, they're saying it will take about 30 years, but I think this might even be 60 years, 100 years as well. So continuing to release this contaminated water, I think this is really a crime against all humanity as well. And this is not just an issue for Japan. This is something that I hope that we can all raise our voices together. Thank you very much.
はい、ありがとうございます。では、渡辺さん、どうぞ。
So we have a question from Watanabe-san.
あ、ご質問。
マイク入ってます。
はい、聞こえております。
聞こえてます。
はい。
ありがとうございます。渡辺真也です。
Thank you very much. My name is Shinya Watanabe.
唐突な意見なんですけど、私パブコメにも出したんですけどね。
So I also
関連した質問じゃないと提案はダメですか？
ではそれはですね、アンケートの方に。
So the speaker wanted to ask if they could maybe share more of a personal opinion, but for now we'd like to focus on questions to the speakers, and then we'll continue with the session and have more time as well. We have a question from Tamaya Tomoyo, who is participating from Hyogo Prefecture in the western part of Japan. My question is about the tritium contaminated water. And, I think that really what we need to do is to have a change in governments. I think this is also, linking this to the election activities, not only in Fukushima, but all over Japan. As long as the current LDP government continues, I think it will be extremely difficult to make any change in these kind of policies, this kind of way of doing this as well. So I'd like to ask the speakers what they think about this, if they think that, changing government is perhaps the only way to actually make a change in this situation. Would any of the speakers like to respond to that?
いや、
Mr. Sato,
政権交
who
代
is
以
also
内に
actually a
止め
local
ることはできな
councillor
いという
in
ことを
Fukushima in Iwaki as well.
でしたら、まあ、それは自
So
民
I think
党
that,
がこの原発事故を
of
起
course,
こし
the
た
LDP
政権、
government,
起きたときは民主党政権かもしれ
well,
ません
while
けど、
they
ずっ
may
と
not have been in government at the time of the
戦後の
disaster in
30
2011,
年
they
間の
were,
原
of course,
子力推進
responsible for the
政策、あ
30
るいは
years of
安
nuclear
倍さん
promotion
が
policy before
安
that
倍
as
さ
well.
んが、
Since then as well, Prime Minister Abe for
あ
years,
の
of
ような事故が
course,
起きないというようなことを言ったり
who had been,
して
promising that
いた
a
わけで、そ
disaster
の
would
責
not be
任
possible and
は
so on. So
か
the
なり自民党
responsibility and
政権に
accountability on the
自己
LDP
責任もある
government
わけ
is
ですけれども、
very strong.
まあ、政権交代すればそれは
And of course, if there
現状
is
を
a
変えることは
change
当然
in
可能だと思いますが、
government, I think that that will be
な
one
かな
way
かこ
to
れ、
change the situation as well.
現状で、
But looking at
次
the
の予想され
reality
る
overall as
総選
well
挙
and
で
the
一挙に
general
政権
election
交代
which
まで
can
いくかと
be
いうと、
expected next,
政治情勢はそれほど甘くはないか
whether
と
we are
思
up
い
to
ま
the
すので、
stage of being able to
私た
expect
ち
that
と
kind
し
of
ては
change is something that I'm not completely
全国の
convinced
漁
about.
業
So
者
I think
全
what's
漁連
really
が反対しており
important
ますの
is
で、
we
全
have,
国の
for example, the
県漁
National
連、あ
Fishermen's
るいは環
Association,
境
Fishing
の
Association
皆
has
さんにですね、
expressed its
全
opposition.
国
I think
各地の
also
市
if
民の皆
other
さんが
national
声をかけて、
associations
やっぱり一
outside
緒
of
に
Fukushima as well,
こ
national
の海洋放
agricultural
出に
associations,
漁業者と
citizens
とも
groups,
に
and
反
so
対
on
だという
can
ことを
continue to raise even
各
more
基
strongly
礎自治
their
体の議会に
opposition to
意
have,
見
for
書の提
example,
案をす
different
るです
local
とか、あ
municipalities
るい
all
は
throughout Japan
各県の
submit their official
知事
opposition
に
to
そういう
this,
訴えをするとか、そう
to
いう行
appeal to their
動
local
も
governors
必
and
要な
so
の
on
では
about
ない
this
か
as well.
な
I
という
think
ふうに
even
考えて
without
いま
waiting
す。
for a change in government in the future,
以上です。
that's something that we can do in the meantime as well.
他の方、もしもコメントあれば。
私も政権交代しないととは思います。
I also believe that we need to have a change in government, but at the same time, here in Fukushima,
共闘して、
we have had times where citizens groups and the opposition have, worked together to, bring in more progressive candidates and so on who are active on these issues as well. So that's something which we as the local community members will keep as well. So thank you everybody for sharing the questions in English in the chats as well. The MC will pick up some of these on behalf. There was a question specifically about the fuel pool in reactor 4 from Lucy. So we'll take that part first. So first of all, asking if someone can confirm that point. So about the situation of the fuel pool in reactor 4. And there's also the question about the current test results regarding children and cancer in the Fukushima and Tokyo regions. So we'll take these two and perhaps we can ask Kanna Mitsuta to respond to these questions. So first of all, I'm just going to look through my data and look through my figures to confirm the situation about the fuel pool. But it seems that the contents and so on, the official information is that release was finished in 2014, apparently, but we will check those numbers and get back to you on that as well. Regarding the children's test results and so on, so according to the Fukushima, the medical survey, which is being conducted of people who were children of 18 and under at the time of the disaster, there are still the regular tests going on, which are being reported and made public. The fact that, well, there are many different issues with the way that this is happening as well and the results as well. I don't want to just make a too brief response to sort of lead any misunderstandings and so on in that. But there are different information and sort of data which is being released regularly, which I would be happy to provide the sort of full details with you and so on directly to have the actual numbers and to sort of explain and analyze a little bit about what they mean as well. And I think the question before this is also very much connected as well, looking at, for example, the government is saying at the moment, well, there's 30 years required for decommissioning, but by then everything will be fine, everything will be back to normal. It's sort of the way that this is being presented. But there are many different local city leaders and so on who of course know that this is completely false, but at the same time aiming towards this situation where in 30 years the decommissioning will be finished, the tanks will be gone, the water will all be finished. They're sort of using this as their standard, and everything is being moved around in this kind of way as well. And so TEPCO's plans of how to use the land on the site and so on is also based on this. And so the situation of, well, they're really just putting forward these very empty, quite impossible sort of false visions of what the situation will be like in 30 years. And then this is where the discussion is going. And I think this is very much continued. So I'm sorry, perhaps this didn't directly respond to the two questions, but we just want to make sure that we do have the actual figures, the actual numbers provided rather than sort of just giving a very brief information as well. But we will continue to follow up. And for those other comments which were shared in English, but we haven't just responded directly to, we will come back to those later on within the session, within the remaining time. We'll have another Q&A section as well. But we'd like to move on to the next speakers now, if we may. So the first part was focusing on the contaminated water. The next one will be focusing on contaminated soil. For those questions which did require more specific responses and so on, we'll be very happy to follow up directly with you after this session as well, to make sure that you do have the most accurate and sort of detailed information as well. So now I'd like to explain a little bit more about the contaminated soil situation now as well. I'm sure many of you may be familiar with it, but there are huge amounts of contaminated soil as well. The amount which is being announced by the government, which has been, well, the soil which has been generated through the decontamination process in Fukushima Prefecture is now up to 14 million meters cubed. According to the Ministry of Environment, they have made a policy that they will start to reuse this soil, that soil which is of 8,000 becquerels per kilogram or less, for example, on roads, on making seawalls, railways, disaster prevention forests, and so on as well. So this policy is also connected to the, the 30 years that we just mentioned as well. But also the purpose of this, well, is also to reduce the amount of contaminated soil which is needing final disposal, and to also start to disperse this throughout different parts of Japan as well, actually. This is an example, or the graph that the government is using to explain how this will be done. Apologies that this is only available in Japanese, but this is the numbers or the graphic about how the government is planning to be using this as well. So it's somewhat, the figures are not really very, very clear at the moment. But so they are talking about, first of all, this different soil, which is being moved to the temporary or interim storing places within Fukushima. And there are these, temporary storage sites, I'm sure as you've seen in the previous photograph, with these black bags full of the soil which has been taken out. So they were in different parts all throughout the prefecture, now are being moved to centralized interim zones. And then within 30 years, they're planning to make it all either reused or stored outside of the prefecture as well. So part of this is reusing it in different other locations, other methods, and so on. So this is, for example, the different kinds of uses for this. So for example, in railways, in seawalls, these are all in public works. So this is all saying where they will be able to continue the operation, to continue the management themselves as well. And just recently, this last one, which is using it in agriculture, has just been added by the government. Initially, this was not included, actually. So this is showing the sentence of the government's sort of basic way of thinking about how they plan to use this. So first of all, it is using it in public works, meaning that they will be able to manage and be responsible for them themselves. Also saying that, well, there are various things that they're saying about, based on the additional exposure dose assessment or the radiation concentration, really emphasizing or trying to say that it will be very limited use and so on. There will be more soil put on top, so it's fine. This is the kind of explanation that is being made. However, of course, as I'm sure you can hear when you're listening to this, there are many different problems for this as well. Either way, of course, it gives an okay to a diffusion of radioactive materials into the environment. And what would happen in the case of any future disaster? There is a case that this might be further diffused if this would happen again. Also, for example, if we look at the different standard clearance levels and so on about the reactor regulations and so on, the levels in that case is 100 becquerels per kilogram for cesium-137. So this is actually really a double standard, the fact that they're using very different standards here as well. Also, if we would consider, for example, if this contaminated soil were to be used for road embankments, it's thought that it would take 170 years to decay to 100 becquerels per kilogram. But yet, on the other hand, the life of such a mound, such kind of an embankment, is considered to be about 70 years. So it's a complete double standard in terms of the number of years. And well, what would they do with the soil after that then as well? And the thing that we are very much concerned about is the fact that these plans may be going ahead without full explanation being made to the local residents and without full public access to this information as well. Within Fukushima, there are various different testing or experiment demonstration projects already in place about this. In Nihonmatsu, in the city there, this was suspended due to strong opposition from the local citizens. In Minamisoma, which is the city just to the north of the nuclear power plant, there was one test about making embankments and so on in a temporary storage site, which has been completed already. And there is another plan now that they have said that they will be expanding 4 lanes on the expressway, which was stopped for many years after the disaster and has just recently reopened. However, the local citizens are in opposition to this, and this plan has also not been going ahead. The one which is going on at the moment is in Itate village, in an area of the village called Nagadoro. So this is just some photographs. This is the photograph from Nihonmatsu, which stopped because of local opposition. This was to be used for the road embankments. This is a photograph from Minamisoma, which is where there was the expansion of the expressway, which was also stopped. But in regards to Itate, which is where it is still going on, this is also a picture which was borrowed from the Ministry of the Environment. But so this is in an area which it is still designated as a so-called difficult to return home area, so where the people are still in evacuation. The contaminated soil from all different parts of the village are brought in and used for farmland development here as well. So this is where it's being used to sort of build up the embankment here as well, and then planting. Supposedly it was to be planting flowers and also to be planting materials which would be used for biofuel. This is being officially designated as part of the reconstruction project of the national government. So this is, again, well, for the local citizens, because it was proposed as part of this national project, it's very difficult for them to raise any opposition to this as well. However, somewhere along the plan, there were changes made to this plan without full announcement as well. Well, the crops originally were planned just for flowers and bioenergy. They ended up also cultivating vegetables. Also, there was supposed to be 50 centimeters of clean soil cover on top. However, there is also cultivation happening without that cover being put on top as well. So this process actually is, very, very concerned. So this is a photograph from the Yomiuri newspaper, the national newspaper in Japan. And it's showing actually that this demonstration project was also harvesting vegetables. This is lettuce here as well. And also reporting, well, the national media is reporting very widely that it was below the national standard of 100 becquerels. But what we are very concerned about in regards to this is, well, not just the issue of how much is transferred to the vegetables, but the fact that the local community and those people who are working on site here as well, there is of course the potential of them inhaling these contaminated materials and so on. It's also located right next to a river as well, so there is also the potential risks of these contaminated materials flowing into the river, which affects the water sources as well. And so the fact that this information is really not being fully accurate and also not being shared thoroughly as well is of great concern. So, well, of course, the contaminated soil, it was originally meant to be brought into storage facilities. So why they are forcing through and going ahead with these plants for using them for growing is something of great concern. Until now, radioactive materials, there were various different regulations and so on in plan, including through the radioactive contamination prevention law and so on. But within this, one of the fundamental concepts is that radioactive materials should not be dispersed and that they should be centrally controlled. However, while other pollution-causing substances are regulated in this way, it was always assumed that radioactive materials would not in the first place even be leaving the site of the nuclear power plants. Therefore, they often actually are not fully covered in many of the different restrictions and so on. They're not necessarily defined as pollution-causing substances because there was this false assumption that they would not be leaving the site already anyway. And so we are appealing also that this should be revisited and the regulations should be made more thorough as well. Thank you very much, Ms. Mitsuda. When we look at both the issues of contaminated water and also contaminated soil, I think the issue there is about the government dispersing and saying that they are diluting or weakening and treating and so on. However, this is of course quite a concern. One other last point that we'll be talking about today as well is also using contaminated materials for bio energy as well. We'll be hearing from Ms. Wada, also a local citizen activist, on this issue. What will be displayed within the Zoom is the Japanese slides, but we will make the English available to you also.
よろしくお願いいたします。まず福島の森林は大
So my
変
name is Nakako Wada. We, of course, have the situation, first of all, that the forest in Fukushima is very contaminated. The forests are not actually included within the decontamination, which is being conducted by the ministry. But so the issues, of course, of what happens for those people who are living near the forests, who are relying on the forests and so on. There was a study group, and the presentation file in English has just been shared as a PDF in the chat once again. Thank you very much. So there was, just a year after the nuclear power plant disaster, there was an arrangement on the future of forests. And one part of that is that they said that treatment of the waste from the forest would be used for biomass power generation as well. So this is a graph from the different members of the Ministry of Environment meeting, which included people like Shunichi Tanaka, who is quite notorious actually for minimizing or de-emphasizing the health risks of the Fukushima disaster. So this is a slide here which shows the IAEA mission, which was sent to Fukushima to conduct various different technical suggestions, technical expertise, and so on. We apologize, perhaps the slides are not exactly the same in English and Japanese, but we'll make sure that you receive the updated information. But at the time, of course, the IAEA mission, mentioned that many different, a large volume of additional materials that won't be needed will be sort of dispersed and so on as a result of this. And following that, there were various different discussions back and forth, which led to the discussion, for example, of burning as biomass and then using HEPA filters, for example, bug filters, which can catch most of the different materials. And there was quite a strong promotion from the IAEA and from these also different committee members as well, saying that these different organic materials which come out from the decontamination waste should all be included. As was just listed in the chat, sorry, we apologize that these slides were not included in the previous version, which has the English, but we'll be sure to upload this later on for you as well. But there are these very opinions in this saying, it's very easy to trap the cesium. It's very easy to trap, and the citizens, the local residents, are just too worried. They're too nervous about this, and so on is what was being said. In the following missions as well, there was continuing opinions all going ahead and saying that these organic materials should be definitely used for biomass, that it's a way for them to be effectively reused. The decontamination of the forest should be directly linked to biomass, and if you do this, then it will make it even more possible to have more decontamination efforts done. So initially, the forests were not included in the plans for decontamination just because it's too difficult. However, this was a suggestion saying that it could actually be done if these kind of links were made. And also, people from the local Fukushima government and so on, pushing forward or saying that biomass is, a great way to be saying. So we can see this was really sort of the overwhelming debate within these discussions. This document is what was handed out at this environmental restoration study meeting. So this is back in 2012. This is just the year after the disaster, but there was already these discussions about, for example, saying, just changing the name from radioactive waste to woody materials or woody biomass and so on. And this can mean it will be very effective. At the same time, there was also various different industry associations who were active. There is a sort of advisory council which was set up on the remediation and waste management. But there was also, of course, this would lead to great amounts of orders being made to companies and sort of business for them as well. This graph is showing the links between the different companies who are making submissions and so on for being involved within this overall process as well. And so there was a request made there for those materials which can be used for biomass should all be redirected to that as well. And then from there, this would lead to also the liquidization or reduction and so on, and then creating reused materials as well. This very small photograph here, but this says it's from a facility called Meltec, which is in Iwaki City in Fukushima. So this is where they're creating out of the radioactive waste and ashes, actually creating sort of recycled materials. So they're calling this, a cyclic society of recycling and so on. And this also means a reduced burden as the National Ministry of Environment, which is what they are, hoping for. So that collaboration with companies and so on, perhaps it's a little bit difficult to describe, but one of the things which is very important there is that there are no laws and regulations for woody biomass that are regulating this as well. There can be largely split into 3 different areas. One is materials which are seen as of value. There is no laws or regulations and only voluntary industry standards. Those which are for personal consumption, so that's, wood stoves at home and that sort of thing. Once again, there are also no laws or regulations. There is a standard which is set for pellets, and that's 40 becquerels per kilogram, but that has no legal basis. Once they are defined as waste materials, that is when there are laws and regulations in place. And the relevant law is, as was referred to before, the Act on Special Measures Concerning the Handling of Environmental Pollution by Radioactive Materials. So this is particularly targeting the materials which are or which originated from the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster. So, well, this is emphasizing, well, what is actually designated as waste within this as well. So, first of all, it is defining that which is 8,000 becquerels per kilogram or more. And within this, this is so the words taken from the actual law, and the standards which are set by the Ministry of Environment. Well, it says that anything which fits these limits, it's quite limited, but anything which does not meet these standards must be managed by the Ministry of Environment. And this includes also materials which come from incineration facilities, which is, ashes and so on. But actually, because biomass, is not from these kind of incineration facilities and so on. So it's actually a bit of a loophole that they're not included within this. And even within this kind of definition, it's also possible for, though it's sort of a voluntary process, but the entity which owns this kind of waste can apply to the Ministry of Environment for designation, but it's only voluntary. They don't have to do this. And, as we mentioned before, it's really, it could be seen as, it's not regulated at all in this sense. This is some figures which were provided by Mr. Ito Nobuyoshi, who is a farmer in Iitate village. And he measured the different ash from household wood stoves in Iitate last year in October, and could see even more than 500,000 becquerels there as well. So this is not just designated waste, but it's of an even much more serious level than that. But nobody in the national government or TEPCO or anybody would take back these ashes. And it's, extremely the fact that these figures here, TEPCO should be covering the costs for this, but actually they're not. And Mr. Ito himself is covering this, and it's about close to $2,000 to $3,000 per year in US dollars. So this is just showing some of his research and so on the wood contamination there. But so this is some of the background to how this biomass power generation was introduced and some of those different interests and so on. But next I'd like to introduce briefly, if I could, what the current situation in Fukushima is now. So in Aizu, which is in the western part of Fukushima Prefecture, there is a sort of model project which is gaining a great amount of attention. However, when you actually go to the site, first of all, you will see, these huge, cameras sort of watching over and so on. When you go around to the back, there is also, you can see this, monitoring cameras, these very scary looking signs, shall we say. There is another company which is running this as well. And when you go and visit the company site too, you can see it has very large signs saying, cameras are watching, cameras are watching. So it's, well, they're presenting themselves as sort of a, model recovery project. The fact that it's being conducted in this way actually leads to sort of concern in that sense. We asked some of the local residents their information and so on, it seems that there is no records at all of the measurements of the fuel chips, flue gas, or ash, and so on. However, apparently, they are saying that they are considering using the ashes for fertilizer. This is in the city of Tamura. So this is a project which we have been in opposition to for the past 3 to 4 years. The facilities there are almost finished now, and the Tamura Biomass Energy is potentially going into action very soon, actually. But it's using various grants from the government to accelerate the revitalization of Fukushima. Actually, more than 4 billion yen of our taxes are being used into this. However, when we call for information to be made, this is actually the document that they gave us under the Freedom of Information Act. It's completely blacked out. So we can see that, we don't have any information made possible about the procurement schemes, where this is coming from, any of this kind of information. So anybody, except for those who want to cooperate with the project, are completely blacked out from this information. And this is actually going through legal proceedings in opposition to this project as well. This was just made public in June of this year. This is in Iitate village. This is in Warabi-daira, in area of Iitate village. And this is where they will be making a radioactive waste and temporary incineration facility, which will then be used as a biomass power generation. The shareholder company for this is TEPCO, TEPCO Holdings. And then also they're working together with Tokyo Power Technology. So they have joined together and created this new company, which already leads us to questions, I think, for the background. In the end of October, these facilities will be completely, so they're building it up as a test, then they're going to take it down, and then they're actually going to switch it and building a new incineration facility. So actually the fact that they're building, then breaking down, and then building again shows that it's very ineffective and costly as well. They will also be using contaminated bark for the fuel from the evacuation areas as well. This was just made public very, very recently. This is in the Yanagawa Industrial Park in Date City in Fukushima. And this is where a site of about the double scale will actually be planned now as well. And they're planning to start operations in 2023. So incinerator ash, which is of less than 3,000 becquerels per kilogram, is being used as the base materials for this. So Tamura is the city in Tamura, the facility there. The first one that was shown is going ahead with this kind of system. But when we think about biomass, where is the responsibility here? Who are the perpetrators? The people who are responsible for the disaster, how are they involved? And the responsibility of the national government and TEPCO are really made very ambiguous in this plan. There are also many different issues with the Act on Measures for Radioactive Materials. It really makes it very difficult for people to be, looking for compensation for decontamination and so on, because biomass is not included in any of these. It's all being completely done sort of in the dark without information being made fully public as well. So these are some of the concerns. Sorry to rush through quite a bit, but here is the information I'd like to share with you all. We can see that there are very serious projects which are still going ahead now, and really very lack of information. So thank you very much for sharing all of this with you as well. We have another local resident who is a journalist who will be sharing a comment with us now as well. We'll be hearing from Masano Atsuko. My name is Masano Atsuko. I am a journalist. I don't have so much time, so I'll just share a couple of my reflections. Well, looking at, for example, the reuse of the contaminated soil, and also, as Ms. Wada has just mentioned, the woody materials, the contaminated woody materials being reused for energy generation. Both of these, they're really finding the loopholes in the legal system, the legal restrictions, and making these interpretations in order to go ahead with these plans in a way. Since before the disaster, there was a law in place about the handling of radioactive materials, but this was really something which was applied for operating nuclear power plants. That was really all that it had included, and it was working on the assumption that there would never be any kind of disaster. So there were, of course, various different standards being set in that, but they were in regards to, for example, concrete and so on within the facilities, within the materials, and up to 100 becquerels per kilogram. When it comes to soil, we see 8,000 becquerels and below as the standard here. But if it says if it is being controlled, then it is able to be used. So that's the new situation. But this is really being done within a very non-regulated system. The Ministry of the Environment, however, since the disaster, they really rushed through in making these, these special acts, the special measures about what to do, because they didn't have any, they hadn't made any preparation at all for what to do with this. And the situation here is whether it's talking about soil or the woody materials and so on. But there was nothing included about the reuse of this as well. So using these materials, there is no legal structure, legal system in place actually about this. So as Ms. Wada mentioned in her presentation, and Ms. Mitsuda as well, these loopholes really mean that the Ministry of Environment is going ahead with its strategies, which are not based on any sort of legal structures and so on. So their strategy for the technically reusing the different materials and so on in public works. And as a result of this means that, well, because they're still facing the problem of not finding final storage sites for this contaminated soil and so on. And so this is their way of getting around this problem, really. But within this strategy, despite the fact that it has no legal basis in there's no legal standards and so on, which are fully in place to actually deal with this, they are saying that the reuse is included within the waste. It's a very, very ambiguous and iffy interpretation of the whole system, shall we say. And so they're saying, rather than including this within sort of national law, they're including just within this sort of situations. In January of this year, the government did call for public opinions to be submitted about this as well. However, what was released in April didn't even include any kind of standards as well. So this 8,000 becquerels, which is being, based on this, is, well, it's thought that it will take up to 200 years for that to reduce to decay. But this isn't even set at all in writing as well. So if we look at the long-term impacts, the long-term perspectives of this, the law which was originally in place before the disaster was looking at the restrictions for on the plant, for the plant operators and so on. But we really believe that we need to have further stringent legal standards in relation to this as well. In this case as well, there were several thousand public opinions which were submitted, almost all of which were in opposition. And well, we're not sure whether there is any plan to actually go ahead and make any more, stringent rules and so on for this. But we are, seeing these very ongoing situations. For example, as Mr. introduced, the plans or the testing which is going on in Itate now, which includes even growing agricultural materials as well. So the fact that this is going on despite this process is something that I think we want more and more people to be aware of, so that we can have stringent legal measures put in place to ensure that there will be no further health or environmental impacts. Thank you very much for your comments. So we have 10 minutes left. We'd like to once again take some more questions. Once again, thank you for your understanding, English speakers, but we'd like to ask you to use your questions in the chat function, and we will try to reach them. Any that we don't manage to get to within the time, we will make sure that we do get back to you as well. So feel free to add them in the questions as well. We have one question which has already come in the chat in Japanese, which is about biomass, which is also, sorry, I'm just trying to find where this question is. So this is about the different materials which are being used. Are they cutting down trees in the forest which are contaminated to be using for this? And if so, then of course those people who are involved in the forestry and so on are also potentially exposed to contamination as well. So first of all, there is the issue that because the forests are not included within the decontamination, there's actually not a lot of monitoring going on in there as well. Also, there is an issue of different experiments and so on about using bug filters or HEPA filters. And the national government is saying that if these filters are being used, then it is able to remove most of them. However, this is of course an issue. Just to add some more information about that, the different waste materials at the moment, they are already including quite a few different forest materials. And also bark is also quite an issue here. Bark tends to accumulate quite high levels of radiation. Before the disaster, of course, it was being used in on soil, in fertilizer, these kind of things as well. But of course, it cannot be used anymore. So they had been struggling to find a way what to do with that. So I was assuming that probably that will be one of the things. I wonder if Ms. Wada has any more information about that, however. They haven't really made it clear actually what they will be using for the fuel there. Some of it will be, chopped down, chips and so on with chips. And in Tamura, for example, that's mostly what they're using, also in Aizu. But there are also cases of, the waste from the contaminated materials. It's really unclear. They haven't really made it very clear at all, what they're doing there as well. So yeah, they haven't really made it clear about what they're actually going to be using as the fuel, whether it's the timber from the forest thinning or. So we'll take a couple more questions from the chat. So there's one question about what the local farmers and the local residents think about the issue of using contaminated soil on the agricultural area. So when we spoke with the local district leaders and mayors and so on, it's well, because it's being included within a proposal within the national strategy, the local government or the local leaders say that they didn't really feel that they had any choice to oppose that as well. When you hear local residents and so on, there are voices which are in opposition, but there's also the issue, for example, even if they're not able to return to live in their village again, many people do want their villages or their area around their former homes to be decontaminated so that at least the land can remain. So if in some ways this reusing of the soil and so on is being presented as a way to allow that area to be reused again. So there are different opinions and so on, interpretations about how they accept these plans. So also, Mr. Oshima, who's joining this, who's a local resident, has said that he would like to share his perspective there as well. So in regards to this testing in Iitate village, it's a national government plan, and we've been looking into it. And I spoke to 7 people who are directly involved in the plan, actually, and they say, well, if it's only an experiment, that's okay, was one of the responses. But the fact that it's being done without the clean soil covered on top as well, that was something that they were quite surprised by as well. You know, they sort of said that they didn't necessarily have the full information there. So seems that the Ministry of Environment has sort of gone ahead with the project without necessarily even telling people those directly involved in it so much. We would like to take a couple of the questions which have come in English now as well. It's almost coming up to the time, but we might continue for another couple of minutes over, if that's okay with everybody. So we have the question from Kevin about the incineration of radioactive contaminated minerals such as wood. First of all, about the different radiation monitors in regards to that, and the inhalation doses, whether there is any monitoring there. And another additional one which had come in English was about information. This is a question from Carolyn. So are citizens able to find information and the truth through other means as well? So we will take those 2 questions together and ask if any of the speakers would like to respond to them.
じゃあ、排ガスの測定ですね。
So first of all, Ms. Wada will respond to Kevin's question. First of all, about the smokestacks and so on, they are saying that there will be some. In regards to the biomass, there are no legal restrictions in place. However, the operators are responsible voluntarily for doing that. However, in the case of Aizu, that hasn't been done at all, for example. And it's actually something that went into operation in 2012 because it was something which was already planned from before the disaster, and they didn't put in place any other kinds of changes in order to looking at, for example, inhalation doses or from the smoke tax and so on. So that's being left voluntarily and not being done thoroughly. And in regards to the information, so in regards to the media, well, they are, the mainstream media basically just reports exactly what they've been fed by the Ministry of Environment, and just all at the same time. That's the situation with the media, and particularly for the local media in Fukushima, unfortunately, being able to raise issues about the risks of radiation and so on is almost not happening at all. And so, yes, people are really finding their own other ways as well. So there are many different still questions, and I think due to the limited time and the fact that we had a lot of speakers today, I'm sorry that we don't have time to respond in full detail to all of the questions. So we will close the Q&A session now if we can. We do still have other questions and comments and so on, but we will make sure to get back to you and follow up as much as we can as well. So either feel free to keep them in the comment, or we'll also be sharing the survey. So you can also share any other questions and comments, and we'll be sure to share them with everybody and follow up with you more from then as well. The survey form has just been shared in the chat now, the Google form, so please feel free to share that, and we look forward to continuing the conversation and continuing to share this kind of information from Fukushima with you more as well. So as we close today, we'll just share a couple of different updates. We've just shared the link of 311mieruka.jp. This is the project where FOE is working to make the situation ongoing in Fukushima visible internationally. The English link has just been named now. We'll be sharing various different data and updates from Fukushima and Japan there as well. So today's for the questions which were not fully shared, please do feel free to share them in the survey. We look forward to continuing the conversation, as we said, especially those of you joining from outside of Japan. In order to, even if you don't have a comment, if you just share your email address even in the form, and we'll make sure that we will send you an email with the different materials from today's session and so on. We did, of course, have you all register in the Zoom, but if you can write your email address in the English Google form, then we'll make sure that we do send the different presentation materials and so on. So we will be having another webinar in 1 month from now, and we'll be looking at the nuclear power exports situation in November. It will be in European morning time that time, so it might be difficult for those of you who are based in North America, sorry, but we will be recording as well. So that will be on November 18th. We'll be having an international symposium once again as well. And today we have been holding this in Japanese and English. This is organized together with FOA Japan and Peace Boat. So the interpreter was Mary Joyce from Peace Boat as well. And we'll just have a few words from Ms. Mitsuda to close off today. So thank you everyone for joining us for quite a long session today. And FOE, we're known probably for running out of time in our seminars for trying to pack too much information into them. So thank you for your understanding with this very packed program today as well. And our very last piece of information is, of course, to share with you that the COVID-19 situation has, of course, had a great impact on our financial system as civil society organizations as well. FOE's work is based on the donations and membership of supporters. Of course, if we didn't have the COVID situation, we would be able to hold various in-person situations and so on as well. But due to that, we are moving these things online. So it's perhaps somewhat more limited than it would be otherwise, but this is also meaning that it's quite difficult for us financially as well. So last of all, we'll just share the kind request for your ongoing support for our work as well. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'd like to close today's session. And we'll just remind any questions as well, you can feel free to share them in the survey as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Have a good morning, day, or evening. Bye.